Everybody in here? Sorry, it's probably good. All right, well, welcome everybody to another meetup. We got one more to go, and we'll have gone for a whole year. So we started Novamine back in January, and coming up on a full year. So great speakers for tonight. And just before we get started, a couple of announcements as we look towards 2015. I mentioned a little bit last time that as we head into 2015, especially the NodeDC guys have really been talking about how to do more community and how instead of having the meetups just be something where you kind of come once a month, you hear a kill talk, and that's cool. And that's been good. I think we've gotten a lot out of it, and it's great to have some regular faces coming on a regular basis and new faces coming, and so that's all good too. But we really wanted to look at 2015 to try and add something that we could do that might even be a little bit more, that might develop some community. And so we're looking at that pretty seriously. And so one of the things we've been talking about is to continue to have a little social time in the beginning, maybe have a shorter talk, so not really like, what do they call them, fire talks? What do they call them when you go really fast? Lightning talks? Not quite lightning talks, but maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But then to break out after that and actually get into some hands-on stuff. And so have an opportunity for folks to bring laptops. We've even talked about maybe having a project or two, whether it be an open source project or something that might actually benefit the community around us. So I was actually talking to Andre, he's a friend of mine, getting ready to go to college next year. And we were talking about that, and Andre had the idea in Loudoun, there's an organization called Mobile Hope that actually is looking out for homeless teenagers, which you wouldn't think that there would be many homeless teenagers in Loudoun County, but they have actually counted now 1,100. And a lot of these kids, kind of do couch surfing and stuff like that, but it's really impressive. Andre and I went and visited Mobile Hope last week, and it's almost like a barracks with clothing and shoes, and they have food, kids coming through to supplement food because sofas, they don't have access to that. And so there's a few of us who are thinking about putting
Yeah, I'm ready if we're ready to go.
Any thoughts on what I was just talking about for 2015? Bernie earnings?
I don't know if I missed it, but what about getting those homeless teenagers to do the work? Like teaching them how to program.
So that's, there you go, there's an idea. So yeah, anything's possible. Anything is possible. So I would say we would start with us contributing first and getting to know them. But that's interesting ideas. Yeah?
Get mom and dad to chip in.
Get mom and dad to chip in. There you go. There, yeah, that's, yeah. What do you think, Doug?
Okay, yeah. I just was doing the sound check too. All right, we are back online again.
All right, so with that, let Morgan tell us a little bit about what Keystone is and what they're doing around a lot of the technologies that we're fond of. So, all to you, Morgan.
Shubhra, you may need to share again.
All right, thanks. Everyone hear me all right?
There we go.
Yes.
All right, cool. Okay, so KeystoneJS. Like I said, my name is Warren Kraft. I'm a full-stack JavaScript engineer at Unified. We're a startup located in New York City, and we're a social operating platform. So we do a lot of different things with social media, advertising, and paid content. And so, like I said, I'm a contributor for the KeystoneJS project. And kind of how I got started was I was hacking away on a project called Ghost, trying to replace a bunch of WordPress websites that I manage. And it became very clear that Ghost is not a CMS. It's literally a blogging platform, and that's what it will always be. So I got lucky and I stumbled on to Keystone. And so kind of what is Keystone? Well, according to some people, it's just an all-in-all song. And so what makes it awesome is that it's a flexible CMS, and it's got a very great coupled architecture. And it's built on top of NodeJS and NPM module system, and it has this incredible generator that comes with the whole project. So looking at the flexibility of the CMS, kind of one of the great things about the flexibility of it is that it's great for rapid prototyping. So kind of how I really fell into it was that during a company hackathon, several teams were using KeystoneJS as first a way to create these workflows so we could easily get data into a MongoDB, and then slowly they built onto that whole project. They added some Twitter data service, also pushing data into Mongo using the Keystone API, and then they needed a way to kind of map the different pieces of content and link it all together so they could display it, and that was like a very curation type of process. And the fact that Keystone provided the workflowing and all the tool to rapidly build this prototype, it was just a really great advantage for the team. And the one team actually won using hackathon, or using Keystone as a hackathon. And so kind of then to go back to what's so great about it also is that it's very highly decoupled. So the first piece of that is that Keystone, the essential module, is an NPM, and that module exposes the public interfaces to do the model list, which are your data access layer. The View API, which is essentially an embedded hub stuff, so it can kind of listen to get, post, put, the various types of REST calls, and it can also do other types of events, and it will also have a way to queue up these different operations. So you can kind of use it to do a bunch of async tasks before it then broadcasts or publishes another event back out. And then it also exposes a utility interface. So Keystone Utils, which is another NPM module that gets installed and is consumable through this utility interface, provides things like slugging, string methods, very typical things that you would see in a
it, and it's this big monolith PHP app where Keystone essentially has been decoupled. So you have the API layer, which is one module, and then you essentially create your clients or your apps. And those could be anything from a brochure website to an actual service or multiple services that are on different machines and kind of doing different types of tasks, but they actually can share some of the model and your view implementation. So that's kind of one of the great powers behind Keystone. It's the decoupled architecture. We're kind of looking at the Node ecosystem for Keystone. Like we mentioned, it's built on top of MongoDB. It uses Express and Yeoman generators. It also has a lot of support for handles. So partly the Yeoman generators, you can actually specify which workflow you plan to use, whether or not you're a graph or a goal. So kind of looking at the Mongo, I'm sure everyone is familiar with it. Document storage is very flexible. It gets a lot of power from Mongoose. So Keystone is using Mongoose underneath, and if you're not familiar with Mongoose, it's a great ODM. It has a schema interface which provides validation and successful defaults. It also allows for you to kind of have more of a relational feel. So you can actually, the code I have here doesn't show it, but you can actually do kind of there's a way to populate and kind of pull in data from other collections. So we'll see more of that later. To explain how MongoDB maps to Keystone. So typically MongoDB has collections and documents. Keystone implements their own sort of abstraction. They call things lists and items. And that's kind of the mapping. So collections are referred to as lists, and documents are kind of referred to as items. And so this is the standard Keystone list. The code here is from a standard blog app using Keystone. But if you look kind of closely at it, basically it actually extends the Mongoose schema interface. So if you look at it, it's actually a lot of the same Mongoose schema stuff. So you have things like the type, the default. You can set unique true, so you can actually tell it that the slug attribute has to be always unique. But if you look closely, you can see that for the attribute state, I hope the highlights are coming in right. You can kind of see it the type stop relationship. So that type is actually from Keystone. If you look up top in your top of the code stack, actually it's pulling the full types from Keystone. So these are extensions to the Mongoose schema. So they actually add some additional schema types that you can use. And these are important because what this is going to allow us to do is we can do things like type in .html and it's a WYSIWYG true. And that allows you then to automatically have the administration forms generated for you inside of the Keystone app. So this is basically this blog post model Keystone list basically being rendered inside the Keystone event. And this is all provided for you right out of the box. You create your list, your Keystone list or model, and then this administration interface is already there for you. So going forward with that, look at just the list. Outside of the admin, using the Keystone list, it's just basically using the Mongoose API. So as you can see here, it's kind of it does this chain where you can take a pagination, populate all their categories. That's actually going to, for those records, will actually go fetch the author records and also the categories for those posts. So that data will already be there. And so it kind of does a lightweight join for you. So just kind of touch on how Express works within Keystone, which is everyone's favorite web framework. Kind of you get your static file serving out of it, which is a great local development environment. Not having to worry about figuring out a static file server. And the great thing about Express is the community around all the template rendering engines. So pretty much every template system out there has a rendering engine for Express. So that provides the ability for Keystone to use any type of template system that you want. And currently there's an open pull request on the GitHub repo for Express 4.0. So that should be in very shortly. So it's taking a little bit of time to get us back up to Express 4.0, but it's going to happen probably in the next week or so. So the next great feature to Keystone is, of course, the Yeoman generators, which I mentioned earlier. So those are you know, if you have Node and Mongo already installed, getting started with Keystone is easy as I can get installed, you know, -d generator, Keystone, and then just go with Keystone. That's it. If you're not familiar with Keystone, this is kind of, or Yeoman, this is kind of how it looks. So when you run the generator, it essentially has a walkthrough process where it prompts you ask for you to define, you know, what the settings are. So for Keystone, the first question is like, what's the name of your project? That will actually, you know, whatever, mortarcraft.com, and it populates all those configuration files with that value. But it keeps asking you further questions. So it asks you, which templating engine do you want to use? Do you want to have a plugin? Do you want to have gallery? Would you like to set up your cloud and area APIs? Like, it just asks you all these questions, and it sets up the entire scaffolding for your application. So this is kind of what the default client looks like coming out of the generator. So this is blog categories. There's a gallery built in. There's also the contact form. And to the right, you can kind of see the tree structure. I included in this one that I want to gulp. So I use the gulp file. The basic gulp file is going to come with, you know, it'll have a watch set up for all the static content. And I think it also has jade included, and also will put in set levels for mobile. But the thing to note right here is that this KeystoneJS file up here that, you know, says the server config bootstrap. That's kind of your entry point into the Keystone app. So actually run your Keystone app, you're going to end up doing their Keystone, or if you put something like forever in front of it, that's kind of how you would do that. And going further with the Keystone.js file, inside of it, that's how you configure. So this is only a subset right here. This is mainly around templating. So you can see in here, if you're all familiar with Express, a lot of these values are actually what you would put inside an Express initialization. So right here, I'm actually telling it I want to have a handlebars that will render. These are where my static assets are in the public folder. And currently, Jade, Handlebars, Swi and Nunchuk released. It only supported Jade. I added the Handlebars support, and I've been maintaining that as well as the default Keystone theme that comes packaged with Keystone. So the Swi and Nunchuk implementation, I haven't looked at it all, but I just kind of glanced at the code, and it looks like the authors have actually implemented everything and put the default theme in the. Okay. So kind of one of the things that I'm working on right now with the generator for Keystone is improve the theming nature. So right now, there is no real way to have different themes, much like it goes for WordPress. You actually can go in the min and select a theme. You have a whole bunch of different themes installed. And kind of go through them and see which ones you like. It's also good for development if you're building a new theme and you know to like kind of work on it and go back to another theme and see how the theme works and switch back and forth. And Keystone natively right now doesn't have that, so kind of working on that at the moment. There's a generator that I have working with a theme pack kind of implementation. So if you click on that link, that'll take you to a GitHub repo where I've been kind of working on that. And so kind of what my themes right now is that Keystone couples all your themes together, which I don't like. So I'm looking to kind of decouple that out and leverage NPM so that we can kind of have the theme packaging situation inside of NPM. And also, of course, I want to build a mid integration so you can actually select different themes. So that's kind of hopefully going to be on the horizon soon for Keystone. And kind of just things about Yeoman that I'm not into. So one problem being, of course, is the run once type of situation. So if there are changes to Keystone, they can go back and make feature parity inside the generator. So going forward, anyone that generates a Keystone project using the generator will have an updated Keystone app. However, those that generated their app 2 months ago, they have to manually update their app if there were breaking changes to their Keystone. Fortunately, that doesn't really happen all that often, but it's not a big deal. But it could lead to some frustrating situations. And then the other part is that as we've been adding new template engines to the Keystone generator, every time you add one, it gets a little bit more complex. It's not exactly a dry interface working inside of the generator. And I don't know if that's just our implementation or if it's some problems with Yeoman. Kind of one of the things I've been looking at is Gulp as an alternative to Yeoman and using it as a streaming generator. So that's something I've been exploring possibly. And there's an issue on their Keystone generator repository, kind of exploring how we might kind of move to a different type of generator. One of the other things that kind of a discussion in the Node community is about polluting the NPM registry and whether or not, front is a great example of this. There's like 1,000,001 front paths, and everything has like a front path. And when they kind of made Gulp, the creators of Gulp were kind of like, stop making these little modules that do things for Gulp. You should be able to just do what you need to with Gulp, not create modules that have to connect everything together. So that's kind of one of the issues with the generator for Yeoman is that every time you make a change, you have to create yet another Yeoman generator. You have to publish it again. And before long, you could end up just having all these Yeoman generators that have been used once and they're just sitting there taking up space. So I don't know what the real solution is to all that, but that's kind of something that I'm keeping in the back of my mind as I've been working on going forward with the generator. So I'm going to kind of go back to the min. So for those that aren't familiar with Keystone, this is just kind of a little demo of these min. This is basically, I have a Git project that's an interface for my website, and it allows me to easily basically link blog posts up to my various GitHub repos. So this is just kind of something I started to show people how it works. So with these min, it's really just a simple web app. It's old school form generation using Jade, and it's old school jQuery, and kind of spaghetti query. And it's been kind of a problem because they kind of just built it as a simple web app, and now it's getting a lot of feature requests, and we want to implement, like I said, themes and plugins, and this has become a great blocker for us because the admin is totally rebuilt. It functions, but it doesn't use any kind of the latest technology. And so there's now a min UI rewrite happening. I've linked the Keystone issue. There was actually a fairly large discussion happening on the Keystone repository about exploring the different options out there. They were kind of evaluating Angular, Ember, and Polymer. And that's actually the favorite jade, the main project lead for a while, mainly because of web components. We really felt that was the future. And the problem with Polymer is not mature enough yet. And one of the complaints is that Angular tries to do too much. Sort of in the end, they settled up that as far as using custom form components, because that's really what these min is. It's really about all these custom and min form components. And I know this is an Angular group, and so I think, with that being said, there's nothing stopping you from building apps with Angular or Keystone, because like I said, it's a very decoupled architecture, and just Googling online Keystone and Angular, there's probably 4 or use cases for using Angular. I think for the package admin interface that's kind of distributed with the project, that's really just a form-driven workflow. React, I think, lends itself well to just this low level, like I just want to touch the DOM, that's all I really care about. So I think with that said, if you want to, use Keystone with Angular, there's definitely plenty of opportunities and ways to do that. So, kind of the forward, going forward in the future, one of the main things is that we're trying to get React squared away. And we're looking to kind of start doing more plugin generators. So those are kind of the main things we're looking to do at the moment. And then sort of our call to action, so how and where we'll grab a generator and build halfway. It's a good place to get started, just make something. And of course, spread the word. We definitely would like to have more involvement and just getting the word out there that Keystone is this really great CMS. It's Mongo. Go gets a lot of high coverage, like 12,000 stars on GitHub. And I might be biased, but I think Keystone is definitely a much better project. And then there's plenty of issues on the KeystoneJS repo. Feel free to jump in. It's a really great community, and everyone's really helpful. And also the generator. If you love golf and you have thoughts on how you use golf to do some kind of restructure generators as a whole, I think Yeoman was kind of created in the era of golf for Grunt. I think there could be a next generation of generators being written using golf. So they don't have any thoughts. Other than that, open to questions.
Cool. Questions? High level, low level, anything's game.
I got a question for you, Morgan.
All right.
Last time I looked at Keystone, there was a section that we kind of needed, and it was a good use case, was the idea of the admin having user roles and being able to have more of an admin role. Is that going to be in the next couple? I think I saw it in the roadmap, but what's the status, I guess, on that?
That is a great question, and I honestly do not know the answer. I'm sure it's definitely on the roadmap. I'm just not necessarily in the know on that one. Most of my work right now, I'm actually doing the React stuff, so I'm kind of out of the loop on some of the other discussions happening within the product. But there is the Keystone project is trying to get more organized. So there's actually a Slack. They actually use Slack now. So if you're interested and want to know, if you reach out to Jade on GitHub, he'll add you to Slack, and they might have some more information there. I'm looking now. I'm not seeing anything though.
Slack is the collaboration area for folks who are contributing. Is that right, Morgan?
Yeah, it's a really great tool, and they've been using it now. And they've been basically, if you go on the repository and you just file with an issue or something, be like, yeah, here's Slack, and Chad will add you in. And yeah, so there's a lot of information there. I'm looking now to see if they have anything. But
yeah, I opened up an issue maybe like 5 months ago, so you might find my issue up there. I was really really bummed that it had no roles, kind of like. But are you guys planning to add that into the React front end?
It's most likely. I could see that being the main caveat, because I know that Jess talked about this problem where like basically people want these features, and he's like, that's great. Because I don't want to keep building things in the admin, knowing full well that I'm going to be rewriting the whole entire thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where and Ghost had the same issue. They had a backbone, handlebars app for their admin, and they basically overlaid everything, and they're like, we have to spend several months and rebuild it all in Ember before we move forward, basically.
Yeah, that's what I use Ghost for my blogging platform.
Yeah, so we're kind of in the same boat where we're basically rebuilding everything. Luckily, there's not that much to it. It's really just kind of getting the workflow done. And I think the one holdup has been that most of us aren't familiar with React, so some of us are trying to ramp up and get some familiarity.
Cool. Any other questions? I think Keystone's cool because it's like it takes a lot of stuff. There are a chunk of us that were in a strong loop class that are here tonight that, and so a lot of the stuff we were just learning about today, it's kind of cool seeing this actually being used and seeing the whole open source process with pull requests and collaboration and the ability to jump in and do stuff. So we're using Keystone on a project here and just more the CMS side, and it's cool. So Morgan, thank you for taking the time to hop in and talk to us about it. That was really cool.
No, thank you guys. I appreciate having the chance. So.
Very good. So we're going to switch over now, and Shubhra's been a part of Strong Loop almost since the get-go, right? Since the get-go, so he's going to share a bit about some of the key things over on that side and what's going on there.
Should I put it on Hangout or should I just share?
Put it on the. Well, you need to share your window. That way, it'll show up in the stream.
You can see it?
Yes, that's your whole desktop. You can share the whole desktop, or else the individual window, whichever is easier for you.
It's the whole desktop.
Yep. Okay. There you go.
How are you? Cool. So guys, I'm Shubhra. I'll try to keep it short. I run products at StrongLoop. Just means I don't get kicked out for writing bad code. That's it. And I was in Vegas yesterday and had a bad day coming over. So if I'm grumpy, just forgive me. All right. So today I'm going to talk about just a few tips and tricks around triaging, diagnosing, and scaling Node.js, whether you're using them for APIs, random projects. So let's see what I'm here for, right? Or who actually rather sent me to this meetup. This guys. And just an introduction, these are some of the guys who work for our company. Ben, Bert, Miroslav, Sam, Raymond. These are the top 5 contributors of Node.js code. So we had the developers first and then created the company. It's the reverse. And today, StrongLoop also took over maintenance of Express.js. So we write about close to 60% of the core code base. And on top of Express, we have developed a platform called as Loopback, which is essentially an ORM, an automation ORM engine, very similar to what Hibernate did for Java or Django did for Python. So that's our platform to build what we are trying to put together is kind of an open source API server instead of like JBoss was an app server. I think Node deserves an API server. So that's what we are trying to build together. So as part of that, I'm going to show you some techniques and leave you with this message that no one got fired for buying Node either. Just saying. All right, so let's revisit the world story, right? How many of you guys work for an enterprise here? Yeah, there's no shame. I used to work myself. All right, so the whole idea is, we always have this notion that let's do our legacy stack, right? Let's restify our SOA for mobile. And the developer is now writing his API directly in Node.js. He's not going through this rejigger of the SOA stack, right? But more and more concern is, he's managed this to convince the architect guy. And the architect guy goes to the boss and says, hey, I recommend Node.js for our API strategy. And the boss has a very valid question. It's too nerdy. It looks like almost like systems programming. Yeah, it's JavaScript, but when you open it up, under the hood, it's all C, C++. Do we even have an IDE? Like, any WebStorm users here? Okay, so you guys are good. The rest are screwed. So WebStorm, I think, is one of the best supported IDEs. There are a couple more, like Cloud9, which has good Node.js support. So essentially, when we started, I'm going to show you some cool tools which will be very helpful. We started by writing a debugger. We didn't write it initially. But the guy who wrote it was called Danny Coates. Used to work for Mozilla, if I'm right. And he wrote version 1. This was based on Blink toolkit. So essentially, it's a browser-based debugger. You can set breakpoints. You can actually have a set of breakpoint and has integration with test frameworks like Mocha. So you can have your test stop on the breakpoint on the browser. You can inspect call stacks. You can make live edits from the browser and try and save it to the server. Don't do it in production. You'll lose your job. So let me show you some of these. Right, as we go along, it's not too risky, but comes with certain caches. So let's go here. Let me launch a new window. Okay, so is this legible at the back? I don't see. And let me know if you don't like live coding. I can bore you with the slides. So, so here's a project. We basically were creating. So if you have to debug a running application, one thing that Node Inspector brings in is the ability to debug on the server side. So if you have a running process on the server and maybe you have error conditions which can only happen in production, you have the ability to suspend a running thread, or rather a process, fork it out with another process so your cluster capacity is maintained the same and debug it on the fly. But if you are debugging this locally, you can simply do SLC or debug, or you can even do node debug. Right? It's basically the same runtime. SLC is strong loops, open source tool chain that we have put together. Has generators built in, all kind of tool chains have been stitched together to give a seamless flow. If I run that and I say server.js, goes here and pops open what we look at, a browser-based debugger. Now, here's my server.js. I have tons, and this is my entire project structure. It's not as slick as an IDE, gets the work done. But essentially, if you have to look at, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and set a break. Let's set another breakpoint here, and then I am gonna execute or maybe step into a function. Now, what I did was on that breakpoint, I stepped into the function. I can debug line by line, step back out of the function, and here, this is the most interesting piece. When I start seeing, okay, I want to inspect. Oh, this is a block here. And I want to look at the array, I want to look at the constructors, and within the constructor, I want to look at all the arguments. I can actually inspect this as I am running my unit test. Now, if I wanted to go ahead and make a change, let's say Shubhra is bad, right? Semicolon. Let's do that. If you enable something called as live edit, it will actually go and save your changes to your server. And that's why I said don't do it in production, but it's a very handy tool when you are particularly working in dev environment. Right? So this is one big gap that this tool is also called as Node Inspector. I would say it's probably the most popular debugging tool out there.
Does it save it to your files, or does it just do it like in a cache?
No, it will actually save. If you have live edit enabled, it will basically, if you have your workspace, project workspace, it will save those changes to your project workspace. Wow. And then if you, and it has tons of shortcuts built in, maybe something like this. Hey, I want to jump to another function, right, or jump to another file. I can go in there, set a breakpoint, and restart the test from the same frame. And if you're using like CoffeeScript, anybody CoffeeScript users here? It has actually built-in support for CoffeeScript as well. So very popular. Only dependency, it runs on Chrome. And there's no shame in saying if anybody who doesn't have a Chrome browser on their machines.
Internet Explorer only.
Okay. All right. So let's keep moving.
Is there just one module called Node Inspector, or
No, it's actually just one module from the inspector. And you can even learn, and there are like, the best thing here is you can debug a clustered process. I'm going to show you how you do that. So if you look at this one, this is when I did a local debugging. I said SLC debug app.js or whatever, right? In V10, you can on the server side say node debug -p and pass it the process ID of a running process in cluster. And cluster management, obviously you have to use this with cluster management, because cluster management will help you fork the process and replace it with another one. So you can suspend it almost, right? And then you can pass it, and on this code you bring it up and it will debug it. Now, this is not very graceful in V10. In V11, it's actually better, because you can say SLC debug, and maybe you have 5 processes running in a cluster. You can just increment the ports, and you can go across multiple processes one by one. So it's much more graceful in V11. Cool. Okay, so now we are moving along, and we are saying, okay, that's all cool, but how about error stacks? Right? How can I stitch all those together? Is it even possible? So the whole idea here is, in today's training, we learned a bit about promises. You guys also might be using domains, right? It's not trying to redo what promises or domains does, but it's essentially what's lacking is that we always think procedural. And in that procedural frame, if you look at Java, .NET, everybody had a thread loop. And that's what helped you stitch together a proper error stack trace or a proper transaction trace. If you had to watch resource consumption, like in Java world, you had a try, catch, and a finally. And finally was where your objects got garbage collected, right? On V8, this concept doesn't exist, right? So essentially, Zone is a library which helps you zonify your application, set a root context. It's watching your execution context, or essentially introducing a thread local. Kind of a I/O wrapper. So if you are within a callback or within a write operation, and maybe this is another execution thread, this is another execution thread, or maybe this is another execution one, you throw an error, that error will be encapsulated within the zone itself. Now you could have a master zone or a root zone, you could have child zone, so you can actually go pretty nested. There are certain limitations that you cannot access a parent zone from a child zone, right? Error handling doesn't work that way. Originally, this came with some overhead, but now it's being tuned down to about 2%, and there's a lot of interest for this. So if I have to give you an example, this is how a long error trace looks like. So if I actually, let me try and simulate this real time, so maybe that will make it better. Okay, so let's do this. Okay. And there's a tool called as inspect.js. You should try it out. Like, it's very good for reading zones. So if I look here, let me run this. Let's actually look at the, okay, let me run this one. So if you throw an error, generally saying, okay, there's a function that did not exist, right? So you are getting a reference error. You might be able to go up to a few frames. You know, even if you look at domain, maybe it's like an 8-frame stack. However, if I were to zonify this application, let's look at the code here first. Okay, so the way I define a zone is I have to obviously require a zone. It's a module. And then you actually say var zone, and then when you are defining within functions, you can actually create zones. The upper one is kind of your root zone. When within functions you are defining zones, those are your child zones, right? So as long as you provide a zonify that function, if this throws an error, it will be handled by the child. If the child throws an error, it will be handled by the root. That's kind of the stitching mechanism at a very layman level. But it's doing a little bit more from an I/O perspective, how to stitch it together. So if I have to run the same thing, if I look at this, is actually giving me a full error stack, saying, okay, A call, B call, C calls D is essentially being called what we know as a blame stack. Okay, this concept existed in Java, but we are trying to make that human readable as such. because our, as Kyle pointed out, we are always programmed to be, reading sequential. We don't really understand the asynchronous nature of this. So that's what Zone does. All right, so let's look at a few other things. So finally, I think the architect is thinking, okay, maybe I can, convince you. But there are some bottlenecks, right? Anybody has used profiling here on Node ever? Okay. So let's look at a few profiling techniques here. So what we have done is, who knows this console? What is this? It's a standard JavaScript console. It's a Chrome DevTools. So what we have done is now you can take a CPU profile, create a CPU profile on a running process, and analyze it with a Chrome DevTools. So let me show you a real use case. How do you profile your application for a hotspot? So if I have to run this, let's see. Oops. Oh, sorry. Okay. So here I have a master process and a worker process. I'll come into clustering, how do you scale it. But if I have to profile this application, what I can simply do is SLC, run control, CPU, start, and pass it the worker process ID. And it started. And now I'm putting in some load at the back end. I have a load script running. And if I have to stop this guy, simply do that. Okay. Let's see. So now what you see here is all of a sudden we created a .cpu prop file. So if you're using Chrome DevTools, you might have noticed that you can actually, on the client side, you can gather stack traces or heap allocation stack traces, or even you can collect a CPU profile. We have kind of ported the concept to the server side. So why reinvent the tool again? If you can generate a .cpu prop file, you can be able to analyze it in the default Chrome DevTools. So I'm going to launch that in a skinned version of the DevTools called a Studio. This is our open source UI that we are building on top of the server. If I look at a profiler, and let's say I load this profile, and then, okay, let's make this bigger. So if I sort on this, you can see that this function call itself, and let's dig deeper. This is not a single function call, it's an execution thread. So you see this one, this emit sequence is actually taking me 71.95% of my CPU. Okay, and I have a very heavy script running, that's why it's so busy. Now, within that, I can see multiple execution streams. These are all async streams that are happening. So if I have to break these down, okay, I'm saying, okay, this one is probably the most important one. And here, I'm essentially doing an on-read function. So I can get down to the line level, to the function level, and if there is a very distributed stack, maybe I can even go through anonymous functions. So here, the call stack starts with an anonymous function. So if I have to go and drill down into that one, let's see. This is simple, but let's say this one. Yeah. You can see here that although this is all asynchronously being handled, I'm actually looking at the entire request chain. I'm stitching all of those together and printing out at every hop what is my CPU consumption time. So the total essentially gives you for that call sequence how much is the total CPU consumed. But then you have to break it down into individual function times to identify up to that line number of your JavaScript file where you have to do it, right? So how do you do this? This is done using the node profiler, which is built on top of that's what it's gathering. Make sense? Cool. So these are good dev time tools. So let's look at a few, another one, which would be very helpful. But before we go further, if you actually look into this and say, look at a chart. Oh, I kind of killed it, sorry. Load it one more time. Yeah, there are different visualizations here. If you are a fancy guy, you can actually expand this entire call stack, and you can go down function by function. This is not showing up very well on my console. But if I have to scroll down here, I can actually read each and every function. That is, I can go down the stack, and it's showing me these are all async calls, but there are call stacks happening between each sequence. And I can read those and get really how much time I'm spending in each and every function call. Okay. All right, let's go back to not reinventing the wheel here again. So we are looking at memory problems, right, as well. So who here believes that there is no memory leak in NodeJS? Probably you've heard Aaron hammer a lot of times. So Walmart had a very famous use case about finding a memory leak, right? They found it in core. But often, memory leaks in core is not a common phenomenon. But when you are writing code, and if you are a coder like me, your code will be full of memory leaks. So how do I detect where those memory hotspots are? So similar to Java, where you have a heap dump utility, what if you had a heap dump utility in Node? Okay. So let's look at this. Run control, status, okay. Now what you can do is you can say, let me put this on the top. SLC, run control, heap, snapshot. And one, process number one, and let's say first dot heap. Sure, I think that's it. Okay, go ahead. Wow, taking a long. I'm putting a lot of load. It should actually taking a long time to take that snapshot. Let me load up another one though. I don't know whether this will crash. Huh? Yeah, there might be a memory leak. It is actually a memory leaking application, so I have no idea. But let me actually show you how to render a heap snapshot. So let's go here. Okay, and if I say, we'll let that other one load whenever that happens. Let's go into the profiler again. And this time, I'm going to load a heap snapshot. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to take multiple heap dumps because one heap snapshot isn't going to provide me the root cause. You can put it on a timer. There are different strategies to do it. You can put it based on a threshold. Hey, every time I exceed 100 megs of memory, take a heap snapshot, right? So here I have a few heap snapshots. Let me go ahead and analyze them. So I'm going to load that guy. Let me load another couple. That guy. Maybe a third guy. Okay. Now, if I'm reading this, what I'm looking for is, first of all, counting the number of objects in here. And that number will grow as your traffic comes in. So it's natural. What should not grow is your retainer sizes. Because what happens as your garbage collection kicks in, if you have GC roots being held back, those objects will start landing up under your retainer. So let's analyze a few more before we narrow down on this one. The second heap dump, oh wow. That heap utilization of that chocolate class has jumped from 22% to about 37%. And the retainers have also gone up 9%. If I look at the third one, I pretty much know there's something wrong with this class, right? It's abnormal growth, right? Otherwise, all the other classes should be growing proportional. Okay, so if I have to break that down in terms of memory segments, these are all the objects that got created. I can actually go down to the constructor and say, hey, within that chocolate class, I have an sugar object, which is essentially an array. And within that array, if I look at the number of elements, there are about 100 elements. Yeah, there's about 100 elements. So what's really happening in this class? I can go down and I can look into how many GC roots are being retained in that particular array function itself. So I kind of mop this up. I put an array and I dumped 100 objects every minute and kept them on a loop without actually clearing memory. So it's not going to be as slam dunk as this to diagnose a memory leak in production. But you get an idea what are you looking for, right? In terms of really diagnosing a leak. Monitoring is easy. Yeah, right? Yeah, it gets you in the ballpark, right? At least you know that what are you looking for? You're looking for collection objects. That's the most probable case. Arrays, hash lists. Yeah, wherever you are playing around with objects which can't get dereferenced. Maybe if you come from the Java world, we used to look at iterators. You have iterator instances. You get out of the iterator. Some objects are still pending, and you don't you don't flush them out. Those will eat up your GC rules. Okay, so that's the way how you go about diagnosing a memory. So that's all cool. These are some tools, but if you want a fancy chart, you can plot this. We originally called this as a bacon donut diagram. We are getting away from this, but you can put a D3 visualizer on top of it if you are really good at Angular. Not a big deal. So what we are now introducing in Studio was what I did was actually I went to the server, took a profile, and loaded it in the visualizer. The next thing in Studio you will see that we introduce a start button similar to what exists on current dev tools, right? But what does current dev tools do? It only captures stack from your local machine. This will be a remote profile. So you will be able to connect to any Windows or Unix machine. If it is a Unix machine, you can pass it a process ID. Maybe it's an instance on Amazon Cloud. On an accessible port, it can actually connect, get a profile, and load it back over the chat. So that would be huge. So from a single client machine, you can now diagnose remotely. A few other things that are coming. This is how we are going to break it down in a more readable format. Yeah, and let's look at this. These are some of the strategies. So if you don't want to use any of the strong loop tools, I'll tell you the module. I want you to use our tools, but it's called heap dump. So you can just do npm install heap dump. There are a couple of ways you can, if you do that, it has an API, a method exposed called as write snapshot. Okay, you can use that, and you can even kill that process, kill -us out to bid, and it will create a heap snapshot file. However, if you have to take this programmatically, what you would do is you can do a set interval function, call that method. Here I have a timer which is like taking a heap dump every 30 minutes, right? Or alternatively, I can have a threshold. Here I defined a memory threshold which was 100 meg. In this case, I'm invoking that, and the heap snapshot function. Wherever that program is running, I need to make it writable. All the heap snapshots will be stored there. So you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night when the server crashes to take a proper heap analysis. Makes sense? Cool. And if you need another fancy chart, this is one. So please feel free. So another cool thing that we are working on is that's all okay, but you need to really track objects. And these objects, before you find out, how do you even detect that there is a memory leak in your application? Right? Well, what's the natural phenomena, or what's the natural symptom? How do you find out there's a memory issue?
Slow.
Pardon?
Slow. So things start to slow down.
Yeah, but slow performance issues, slowness can be due to a backend, right? Yeah. Generally, what happens is you are trying to say, hey, your server goes out of memory, or you are often having to restart a lot of times, right? So that's a high level, there's no science to it. That's just guesswork. If you really have to get to the science to it, you have to actually track the counts of each object and the allocation size of each object in memory. So those metrics, right now we are exposing, it's called object tracking. So if you have to turn it on, we have a command here. So what you can do, I'm not going to run everything, but I will show you some of these which will be helpful. So this is a command here which is called object start, pass it the process ID, object stop. So when you start it, it will start tracking the size and the count of each and every object. So forget all fancy tools and charts. Unless you can get data like that, you'll never be able to diagnose it. So, it's open source, feel free to use it.
Is there some overhead in starting that?
Yeah, obviously. When you start tracking objects, I think it induces about 3 to 4%. But if you're host in production, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So let's move on.
Object tracking. Is that something that essentially you sort of hot patch that to an existing running process in production?
Yes.
So I'm noticing that production's going, memory's going up and up or whatever. And I log in and I just say start tracking its objects.
Yeah, and you may not want to track objects on each and every process. You could pick up one process and just track objects on those. You know, assuming that every process is doing the same. Right? So, and it's and you can, when you stop it, it's like hot deploy. So it will immediately stop tracking the objects. And the output, actually, I'll show you when we talk about the metrics. This is like not even our console. This is CA APM console. We did an integration with them. So we have enabled a way to get the metrics from the agent in any third-party consoles, like Splunk, Introscope, Datadog, Zabbix, or even if you use Graphite, you can get that in Graphite as well. Graphite is open source, it's Python. People hate it, but it's okay. So,
so do you have to have an application that's instrumented to provide that object tracking, or can you just externally object track on any random node application?
No, it can object track on any random node application, but the tracking, it uses the cluster control to do it. And the cluster control actually has hooks for the agent. So it's not just normal monitoring data, it's just essentially looking at every object allocated, what is the allocation size in memory, it's just inspecting the memory segment. So you don't have to be instrumental. You can pick up any node application.
So a clustered node app would be able to be.
Yes, if you run in cluster, because we said, okay, let's do one process at a time. You have, even if it is not clustered, it has one cluster ID. Or sorry, a PID. You'll have to pass it up. Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
Can you use these things in conjunction with zones?
Yeah. But zones is more like at a library level. It's more for transaction management. And zones, what it will do is when you exit the scope of a zone, it will go ahead and try to clean up the memory allocation. But you may not want to zonify everything.
I just think of like if you had a zone and you wanted to catch a heap dump on error, can you do that?
Catch a heap dump on error. So heap dump doesn't care.
I saw that you had like a function that you called heap dump.write. You could do that when it gets caught in a zone, because I'm guessing zones are like try catches, right?
A little bit, yes, similar to it, but yeah. But again, no, you can't trigger it like that. Like there's no control channel between those right now. So zones is more at the programmatic level. This is more at the control level. It's sitting outside of the scope of the application.
But you did say there's an API for heap dump.
There is an API.
But the heap can capture everything.
Yeah, the heap will capture everything. It doesn't distinguish. It doesn't even know whether it's zonified or not zonified. It's going to look at all the memory objects in shared memory and collect it.
What I'm saying is, the way you could trigger the threshold is by capturing the write inside of a zone to the heap dump.
Yeah, you can.
So like if your program was crapping out and you wanted to just throw a heap dump down rather than wait for 100 megabytes to the heap dump to get written. You just capture it in the zone and then dump it out.
Yeah, you can do that. Then in that case, it won't be object tracking. It's a heap dump. It's like a snapshot.
I was just thinking about this while you were talking about object tracking.
Yes. You can put it in your own logic. You can just actually invoke the write snapshot method, that API, and it will create a heap dump. Okay. Cool. So this is all cool, but normally we still need monitoring tools. So we used to have a monitoring tool which we gave like 2 instances for free to developers. We didn't use to charge them. Now essentially what we have done is we are trying to sunset that monitoring tool and move everyone towards on-premises where you can have your own visualization there. So thinking about it, like a JBoss or a Tomcat or a WebLogic never had a monitoring console. There were monitoring tools built around that. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So, but we are giving you the metrics, and all these metrics have a REST API. So you can put it in your own visualization layer. If you have a portal, feel free to pull those into your visualization layer. So if you are coming from JBoss, it's like JMX. Makes sense. So how do I get it? Exporting metrics. I'll show you Okay, let me show you the command here. So there's one easiest way to get it is there's an npm module called as statsd. Have you guys heard about that? Okay, let me show that to you on GitHub. Okay, that's the module. So statsd essentially you can just download it, and it has a UDP listener. And what our agent does, you can have it do a UDP unicast, and by default it will get picked up by statsd. And in statsd you can write multiple JavaScript backends. So if I go into the backends folder here, you can see here that this statsd by default you can send it to console. It has a built-in connector for Graphite. But if you wanted to write your own connector, send it to a portal or whatever, you can write your own backend connector. So this is a project that we use extensively, and this is where the agent is piping it. So but how do I send that? So here I am showing you these are all the output metrics that we are generating in statsd. So to generate that, what we normally do is where's my console? I think my laptop might have gone out of memory. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, so normally what we do is if you go to we have a command where you normally run slc run. You can say -- metrics and provide it statsd : and you can point at wherever statsd is installed. It's an npm module. So you can say localhost 8125. That's the default listening port, and you can give it any name here like app1. And then it will start. And if you want to run it on a cluster, you do provide -- cluster in front of that. So I already have it running, so I'm not going to run it again. But if you wanted to look at metrics, here I have a metrics which I'm pumping to statsd in another third-party tool. So you can look at, oh, I'm getting all these CPU metrics. I can also now start doing what we call as custom instrumentation. HTTP request. I wanted to look at MySQL calls. I wanted to look at garbage collection. The most important metrics here are probably what we call as the event loop metrics. Let me make this bigger. So the event loop metrics, that controls the whole thread ecosystem of Node, because Node is single-threaded. If your event loop metrics are taking more than 20 milliseconds, your system will be hosed like mine. So those are the key things to notice. Other things like if you had an application which talks to multiple tiers, here my application is simple. It's an HTTP talking to a MySQL backend. So I'm looking at those. And the object tracking metrics, if you wanted to look at those, let me bring this up. One second. You look at the objects, those object tracking metrics can actually be printed right into that. Those are also exposed via statsd. So you can actually send them to the query and plot graphs on them, and just put some kind of a calculator on top in JavaScript which says, okay, look at all the counts for each of the objects, and if certain counts are just going north, that's the way to determine that you have a memory issue application. Make sense? I'm just giving you some tools to write your own monitoring here, right? Because that space is very big. Okay. All right. Let's go back to our story. Okay. So now that's all good. This is something that's not in Dairy Node today. We are injecting it. It's called dynamic instrumentation. So every APM vendor, whoever APM vendor you buy from, they have a limitation on the number of modules you have to instrument. So you can only pre-instrument X. Right? And the number of modules are, what, 5,000 a month? Right? They're getting added to the ecosystem. So what if you had an ability to look at any line number within any function, in between a function, and could say generate metrics out of that? That's what dynamic instrumentation is doing. So you can actually give it a JSON file where you can specify a range of line numbers and a regex pattern. and I can show you what that JSON looks like. Okay. Here. This is what patching JSON looks like. So I'm saying here, hey, HTTP server, I have counters like decrementer and incrementer counters. So if I wanted to do some custom logic or statistics, this call gets invoked, increment the counter. The other one happens, decrement the counter. Or maybe I just want timer data. I can inject it on any line number. But again, it's line number specific. So, with version numbers, the package line numbers could change. So you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? So, but again, this is usually powerful if you wanted to, look between any existing function within a try-catch block. I want to just look at 2 line numbers and look at the execution. This will give you the ability. Make sense? But the metrics will be created exactly similar. Okay, and you can patch this on runtime and roll it back as well. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, so let's look at our story. So you got monitoring. But how about scaling, right? Scaling is an issue, and this has. And before we go into actual scaling, to productionalize this, there were a lot of questions around registry management, right? So folks generally say, hey, get all the modules from global NPM. However, the Yahoos or the Walmart, the Intels, all of them do something called as a private registry. So what is a private registry? You have NPM clients, which are essentially what's sitting on your machine. And then you are talking to an NPM.js public registry to pull down modules. And when you do an NPM install, all the modules with its dependencies get compiled to your machine and pushed as a package, right? That's what it does. Now, what you can do here is a lot of them are already using tools like different CI systems, like Artifactory, Jenkins, right? So what you can actually do is still have the public registry as is, or maybe other upstream registries, and you can actually get the data and put it into any pluggable store. Now, to front end that, you don't want your end users to be directly exposed to the public registry. So you can set up what we call as a caching registry. There's a project you should look at. It's called Sinopia, which helps you do that. And Sinopia, you can actually point, Sinopia has different builds with Docker and Chef as well. But it has by default multi-registry support. So you can actually hook it up. And on Sinopia now you can, all your clients will be pointing at the local. You can now enforce whitelist or module blacklist. Pardon? Sinopia. And we also implemented it in strong SLC registry. It's there in strong group tools as well. And you can actually promote. So you can say, hey, create one registry space, create another registry space, and you can actually promote from one registry to another registry. And you can say, okay, these versions are hardened, I want to just move these. And on the back end, you still might be having all the data come in through a script pulled down from the public. So that's kind of the caching way of doing it is the most, I would say it's kind of a best practice. So here's like certain commands. So if you wanted to add a registry, we added them into the open source toolchain as well. You can add as many registries. You can say, okay, SLC registry, add name and point at every URL of every private registry you want. And then you have a list. And when you actually promote a package from registry, this is kind of the first from is from where you are actually going to download it. And the second registry is the space that you are promoting it to. But both of these registries are may not be hooked, or maybe one of them is hooked to Artifactory or Jenkins. So we today ourselves, when we do our CI builds, we do that against Jenkins, but we have our own staging registry. We don't pull from global NPM.
Can you put your own packages on your private registry, or do you always have to just copy it over like you see there?
No, you can put your own. You can put your own. Absolutely.
So it keeps an inventory of which where you have deployed what.
No, so that's kind of you have to create that mapping. That mapping will sit on your local cache, but the actual modules are in your Artifactory type of system. But then in your local cache, you can define segments that, hey, this could be like production space or this could be like development space. It doesn't actually keep a track of what's deployed on every client end. That's done using the package.json. So whenever any client is doing that, like package.json defines it, what's his dependence on.
This is just a way of controlling what the approved things for developers.
Yes, yes. So if you go to eBay, they never pull down from NPM global. They have like certain version numbers, and even in development, they'll say, hey, it's like a tilde version. But in production, I always want to do fixed version. So when they point at NPM, you know, they have a different segment from where they are building against. So when you normally do a build, right, you are building against global NPM. But in this case, they will be building against a staging server, which is kind of their private NPM. Yeah, because the backend system could be anything. It could be Maven, it could be Artifactory, it could be, you know, Jenkins. Yeah. All right. Cool. So yeah, a little bit about how clustering works. This is very important when you are scaling. And I heard like a blabber from a Python guy, oh no, PHP guy, or no, sorry, it was a Ruby guy. Oh, Node is single process. It can't scale. Really? The whole idea is the event loop, right? You have to understand how it works. So there is an event loop which kind of is the postmaster mechanism, right? Goes around routes. It's like a postman, really a postman. It goes around routes and drops off a letter. It doesn't wait for an acknowledgement to come back, but it remembers all the routes, right? Equate those routes like requests, okay? And then when he drops that letter, he knows that there is a mailbox here, and that's kind of a callback address. It's kind of a pointer in memory. Now, that entire event loop runs single-threaded, but all the I/O operations that are back-ended, which are handled by POSIX threads, that's a multi-thread. Now, if you have to scale here, you can over-provision. Normally, we say, oh, I can only run single-threaded. Why? People then stand up individual processors, one on every CPU core. If you have a hyper-threaded CPU core, you can actually deploy as many as you like. But a good practice is, let's put a one-to-one mapping. Even if you can't do a physical CPU core, sometimes hyper-threading will help, right? So you're saying, okay, a logical CPU thread is equivalent to a process. Now, you can pin it to run on a single core itself. However, you will have to maintain them as separate processes. So what cluster control does is when you spin up an application in a clustered mode, it first of all deploys a master process called a supervisor. And as many number of processes you are spinning up, all of those are worker processes. The master does not do any processing. What it does is routing and uses file descriptors under the hood. Now, with cluster control, you get utilities like, hey, if this process dies, it will automatically restart the process. So you are trying to kind of semi-attain high availability, okay? Or if you wanted to add additional worker processes into the cluster without restarting that app, you can actually scale. So let me show you a couple of examples. It will be very helpful. So, okay, so let's look here.
Did you guys build this off of like a fork from Forever or something?
No. We used to use Forever, and we said, hey, it's not. PM2 was much better. Forever was, I would say, Gen 1. Okay. Right? So, and then there was the node cluster module. The only problem there was, like, what was there in the community existing, the file dispatchers, that logic, like you had, if you just use the node cluster module, you'll have to, it's not efficient. The file dispatching is not efficient. You have to write all that logic yourself. You have to watch for connections, drops, and put those logic. So basically, we put a module called as strong cluster control. It's again open source. So you can just feel free to use it. There is a gap there. The load balancing is not perfectly round robin in V10. In V11, that has been fixed. Originally, it was designed to be round robin. So today, you might have some stickiness. So maybe like if you have a 10 process cluster, 6 get loaded more, the other 4 may be sitting idle, right? But in V11, it has been fixed. Okay. So if I say, normally if I run this, it's like SLC run is like node run. If I kill it, it goes away, right? But I can run it like dash cluster. I can give it that. So let me try something here. I'm going to kill all. And say cluster. And I'm going to say 3 CPUs. Okay. So it, essentially, if I look at this talk here, you'll see that it started up a supervisor process. And then it has also started up 3 worker processes, worker 1, 2, and 3. And now if I open up another window, and if you want to run this on the background, all you need to do is pass a -D. option, which is runs is detached on the background. So let's go to and let's say SLC run control status. So that's your master, which is 6959, and then you have 3 worker processes. Okay. Now keep a track of those process IDs because we'll be playing around here. So all of a sudden my CPUs are running hot or I'm getting out of consumption. What I can simply do is run control, set size of the cluster, and I have a 8-core box, and say set its size to 7. And on the background, do you see more processes getting spun up? Now if I just do SLC run control status again, what happened is the master is the same, the 3 processes are the same, another 4 got added dynamically into the cluster, and the master has started load balancing to them without any impact to the application. It's hugely powerful, right? It's almost like 100% high availability. Now, what if I go in there and push in a bad deployment? Or maybe I'm starting to get some errors. So let's do this. Instead of loopback, I'm going to call it soupback. Right? That doesn't exist. So, and let's say SLC, run control, restart my cluster. Okay. So it should have restarted. All my processes should have crashed, right? So let's say SLC, run control, status. Hey, I only lost 2 processes. I haven't lost all 7, right? So what it does rolling restart in batches. So and the batch size is, you can configure it, but if you're doing like, I think the default number is, and if you're under 8 processes, the batch size is 2. If you are under like 16 processes, the batch size doubles. Like the larger number of cores you are processing, the batch size, there's a default value. So again, if I check this, it's steady at 5, right? So the first 2 crashed. I detected that, and it hasn't pushed out the changes to the other ones. Now, what's happening on the background here is if you look at the log, let's see. Oh, I haven't turned on the logging yet. I can turn on the logging, but at the back end, what's happening is those processes which are died, cluster control by default always tries to restart those because it's down. It's like forever in that use case, right? So it will always try to pick it back. So let's see here. So let's now go ahead and fix this problem. Server, yes. Let's go from soupback back to loopback. Okay, and I'm not gonna push anything else. No restarts. Now if I go and say SLC run control status, hey, I'm back at 7. Right? So it's hot applying the patches. Like when it detects a crash, or like after a restart button, like if you have a error that you're trying to fix, it will actually hot deploy after a full running restart. Now note the process IDs. The first 3 have like 6,9 some ranges. The last 4 have like 7,000 ranges, right? Let's check the once again. And now you can see all the processes have been updated. So now because the deployment is good, it will go and restart the rest of the process. So it's hugely powerful, right? These utilities, you need this in production. Now that being said, all of this I'm doing from the client side. What happens on the server side? Okay, so that's kind of what you really need to solve here. So
Shubhra,
yeah, go ahead.
So on the that it's constantly running in the background trying to restart it, and that in and of itself can chew up a fair amount of system resources, especially if you had quite a bit going.
Absolutely.
Is there a way to configure like an exponential back bump on the retry? Because it's trying like once a second or something. Is there a way to get
there's there's no config. You can set batch sizes. You'll actually have to change the code on the code. But that's a good feedback. But I think it does it like once every 5 seconds or something. So by now you might have seen like 50 retries happening.
Yeah, but they can also spam the logs.
I know. No, that's a great feedback. But I think you can change that. It's open source module. You can change that, but there's no config defined. Yeah. Cool. So let's try to actually build that application and try to replicate the same on the server side without interference from the client side, right? So normally I have this application.
I'm going to kill this off. And oh, sorry. Okay. So this is my application. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the heap snapshot file. I don't need that in my build. And I'm going to oops. Oh, sorry. Okay. And I'm going to blow away all my node modules file. Because why? Why should I blow away my node modules file during a build? Is that needed?
Depends on where you're building.
Pardon?
So if you're building you don't want to take all your node modules with you to your build server.
Correct. It can actually bloat up my build server. And what we are doing is when we are also like your package.json is not very reliable, in the sense that what we are trying to do is when we will install it on the server side, when we will boot up the service, on the server side we can pull down the modules. Why make your build process heavy, right? So
if you had a private NPM repository, then you'd have to point your server at that private NPM repository too.
Well, so even on the server, the NPM client is always every machine on your local is always pointing at the local cache. It's not pointing at the global. So it also has an NPM client, right? It will need an NPM client.
So you have to configure that NPM client to point to your local cache.
Yeah, and the way you do it is like you say registry.use and give it the URL, whichever is your registry space, private registry space. Then it will not go and build against global NPM.
The last question on that, if I'm running on Amazon or in the cloud somewhere, is there a way to do that? Or what would folks do if they want to deploy something?
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that.
You just have to have your private repos.
Yeah, we get a box. It's like a shared box, which is kind of available on a SAN or a LAN or some like shareable, and just create a local cache there. So I'm gonna run this couple of things. So obviously you need to do a git init, and I'm going to literally do git add dash all. Oops, sorry. Okay, and I'm going to commit this. Git commit -e -m commit. Okay, and now I'm going to build it. So what we can do is you can simply say SLC build. There are like the default option is always a git build, but you can also say that hey, instead of putting out pushing it to a git deploy branch, create me a tarball. In that case, what we use is an npm pack. So you can it will create an archive or pgz archive, right? For if you don't want to use any git utilities. So I'm just going to push git slc build here. I'm just going to do git build. So let me go and do that. And in the meanwhile, what I can do is on the server side, while this is building, I have a bootstrap process. So like instead of doing that cluster management on my local, we have a process manager which you can put on your host and just boot it up. And you can specify a port. It's a listener port. So when it boots it up, now when you deploy your built application, you can deploy it on that URL which it's listening on. And this could be a git push, or it could even be a tar push. And what the process manager will do, it will unarchive the entire build, boot it up on all available CPU cores, add cluster management, and give the runtime statement. Make sense? So let's try.
What's the authentication model behind this? Like, if I have that port 7777 exposed, can anybody deploy it in my server?
No, you can do SSH. You can actually do SSH creds. And then just like the Git, you have to, just like you are pushing on OpenShift, right? You need the RSA key. And that's how I think that has kind of becoming the general model on most PaaS platforms. So you can, like, if you do the Git push, you need to actually establish the credentials before that. Okay.
Yeah, we use CodeShift. You have to put your public key. Also, even Get to do a push, you have to have your public key available on Git.
Right.
Or GitHub.
Exactly. Okay. So now, so what I am going to do is I'm going to say, bring this thing up. So all you need to do is, I'm just going to copy this, SLCPM, and let's see. Okay, so it's listening. You can see here it's listen on 7777. And if, just to show you here, the and I can just say SLC deploy. Sorry. And this could be any remote host. So you just push that. It's going to take a little bit to deploy. Okay, it's deployed to 7777. On the back end, you will actually see all these processes spinning up. I might already have something running here, but you can see here that it's actually downloading. It's because I blew away the NPM module, so it's actually getting all the NPM dependencies, extracting. You see that it's actually extracting the tarballs, and then it will boot up on X number, all the default number of servers, cores, which are 8 cores on my machine. And all I need to do is, once this is done, I need to just point at the master URL, and it will automatically start round-robin loop. Makes sense. Now, people do this in Chef scripts, put an Nginx, you know. You can do this in Node. Okay, that's the whole idea.
If I was running on multiple servers, I would do that on each server?
Yeah, you just need to have the process manager on each server.
Okay, now I hit that URL.
Yeah, you can just hit that URL. This you can script. You can say, okay, you know, just put the host names and just push. Right.
And we use Perl to script that.
That's true. But
there's an extra class today, right?
yeah, yeah. But essentially, we are trying to port that over into the studio as well, where now all of these were doing through runtime, but you can actually do a git push or a universal push, and you can actually specify the host names, and you can actually say, oh, give me a deployment directory. You can push to that directory, a deployment branch, or you could actually push out to a server. So that will all come through the studio. So that's why, you know, keep watch on that. It's open source. We are trying to make life easy, but a system admin won't ever use the studio. Right? It's going to use that one. Okay, so I want to finish off on this. This is again what is cooking. We all know that we have kind of solved, or many people have solved the one host problem, right? You can scale on multiple processes on a single host. But more and more folks are trying to go to a microservices-based architecture, where, oh, I have like 6 APIs, all of them make up one app, but each of those API is backed by a different data source. This could be connecting to Mongo, the other could be connecting to Oracle database, and I want to run it self-contained, right? And even the endpoints, I want to have like separate for each API. So in that case, what you will probably want to do is the same thing that you provision, you want to provision it at an API level, not at an app level. So we already are alpha with that. We have built a service container, which is essentially a Docker image. And have you guys heard the big news about Amazon with Docker? Oh, so Docker has replaced VMware as the hub spoke for Amazon now. They just announced it today. So essentially, that's kind of Docker is like VM on steroids, right? It has cut out all the flat. But it's a lean container. You can put in your master cluster, the controllers for high availability, the monitoring agent if you're sharing state, like a Redis store. All of that is pre-provisioned. And with Docker, you can also provide resources that that container can use, which you are not able to do till now. How can you assign, oh, give this like 512 meg? You can't do that to a process, right? But with Docker, you can actually assign resources or the CPU share of that machine to an individual API service. Maybe it's less critical, is not that IO intensive. Today, there's no way to segment it. So with Docker, you can actually do that. And when you provision this, all the current state is written to a Redis server. It could be an etcd server as well. And if any of the worker processes changes, every 30 seconds, the state gets updated. And then at the routing time, whether you use any gateway, like we have an open source gateway too that we are building, but any gateway can actually pull the current state of the API services from that Redis store and do runtime. So this is still cooking, and we are seeing a kind of, if you look at OpenStack, they are looking at a similar architecture as well. We are trying to bring that into native to Node itself. So that's what's cooking, and hopefully, with all of these, this guy becomes a hipster. Right? So that's the whole story. So that's about it, right? But essentially, he's not just the whole hipster. All of these guys have been doing projects. So just FYIs, anybody works for one of these companies? No? So we are now seeing a lot of adoption, right, across the board. And that's how you essentially are trying to put a winning strategy. That's about it.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anybody have any quick questions, or you hang out for a little bit too?
Yeah, and like if you have any questions. Yeah, absolutely. I'll you guys post it on your meetup.
We usually do. Yeah,
I think you're good with that on a slideshow.
Yeah, so it'll be up on the meetup. I'm gonna try it. Maybe we get to the meetup. So. Well, cool. Well, we definitely started a partnership with StrongLoop about a year ago, and so for us, it's definitely, all the stuff we're seeing with Node and full stack JavaScript is awesome, kind of on that leading edge. But to be able to bring that to the enterprise and have the support behind it for these kinds of stuff that come up from the tooling and just the support that's real common to Fortune 500 companies is exciting. So we're looking forward to another great year. So good. All right, well, thank you all for coming. Like I said, December is going to be a little more informal. If anybody has any talks, wants to run through, like I thought the Keystone one was great to be able to just see kind of the stacks. A lot of it mean stacking, though they're using React. We don't need to be hardcore. It's kind of all different flavors of JavaScript that are trying to do the same thing. But if anybody wants to do a short presentation at some point, run through the architecture whenever you're ready, definitely let me know. We can do that. So we might have a couple of those that would be quick. Maybe do like 4 or 5 lightning talks, that kind of stuff, in December. And then we're going to spend some time thinking about 2015, right? So more of the same. We're going to do things like Node School, do that for Mongo and Angular. Do we want to do some of this community outreach that I talked to? There's various things. I was talking to a couple guys about, we were talking about rules engines. So, the idea of, I know the NodeDC folks were talking about having just, a framework or something like that a few folks that were interested in, that they would put up, and then the committers for that group and really the organization behind that could be the meetup itself. That's kind of a cool idea too. So lots of different ideas out there, but going into 2015, that's kind of what the theme of December's meetup will be about. Okay. Thank you all for coming.
Yay.